Great. I'm going to do a soft start with the introduction, and then there's still a few people coming in. Some people said they would be a little bit late. So welcome to Mimbre and Upswing's joint slow thinking session. I am Lena Johansson. I'm joint artistic director of Mimbre. I'm a white European woman with short cropped blue tinted hair, wearing a blue jumper. And Vicky.
Hi, I'm Vicky Della Amedemi, and I'm artistic director of Upswing. I'm a Black woman of African descent with purple braids and a zebra print jumper. So thanks for coming to this slow thinking event, which is being jointly held by Upswing and Mimbre. Slow thinking started during the lockdown as a series of online conversations, collective conversations that were responding to the needs of the sector, the things that we wanted to talk about together. And that really is what slow thinking is about. It's about a space where we can join together to talk about the topics that we feel are really, really pressing and important for us to have a dialogue on.
And the context for today's session was a response and follow-up to several discussions that we've been part of over the last couple of years, including pre-pandemic, about inclusion and care in the rehearsal process, and also about mental health and well-being in general in the arts. And sort of last year and this year, we felt a bit worried that as we get back into rehearsals and creation, with the added stress of still dealing with COVID and Brexit and the general insecurity in the arts and the funding situation, that some of the great conversations and the good intentions that we had discussed during the lockdown and pre-pandemic, that it felt like they risked getting left behind if we don't make sure to keep sharing, to keep discussing, and to keep incorporate them into our practice where we can. So I'm really excited about the speakers who has agreed to join us today to share their experiences and reflections. And we got Farrell Cox, Molly Nicholson from Scotty, and Daniela Essart and Søren Nielsen from Scarabeus. They will each introduce themselves further as part of their presentations, but a warm welcome and thank you so much for joining us and agreeing to share the experience you have gathered on different projects and in life. The session formats, we are very keen that this session remains an open space for conversation, as well as a sharing of specific experiences. So the format for today will be that each speaker will share their reflections for a maximum of 15 minutes each. And after each speaker, we'll have just a very short, just a couple of sessions, if there are any questions directly related to what they have talked about. Once we've had all the three sharings, then we'll have a 10 minutes comfort break, which is estimated to be just around 12 o'clock. And then for the second half of the session, we'll open up the room for a more open discussion and invite anyone else who is willing to share their experiences, their tools or strategies that you have found useful in your practice. And we really encourage people to be very focused on what can we do? What solutions are there? What practices are there that we can take with us out of today? But of course, it's also open to ask questions. And, if you have a situation and ask other people of how did you deal with a situation like this? Everyone can join in the way they feel comfortable. If this means that you prefer to listen rather than actively contribute, please feel free to do so. The meeting will be recorded so we can make the knowledge in this session available for people who couldn't make it. But we also understand that there might be discussions you would prefer to stay within this room. So if you want to share an experience or ask a question that you feel more sensitive about and you would prefer to not be recorded, then please ask me or Sarah to turn off the recording for that bit. Or if, say, afterwards you feel like you overshared about something, you can also contact me or Sarah after the session if there's a bit that you would prefer us to edit out. The session will finish at 1 p.m, but of course, if you need to leave earlier, that is fine. Automated captions are available for this meeting. Accessing them will depend on which device you are on and what system. I've just put a link in the chat which has directions on how to turn them on for all different system devices. And if this doesn't work, please ask for help in the comment box and Søren will assist you. There's no video content shared today, so it's mainly speaking. And if speakers can please remember to speak quite slowly so that the audio, so the subtitle system has a chance to get it right. Apologies for any mistakes that will be there. Please, if you can change your name to include your pronouns, and when you speak, please give a very brief audio description of yourself, your name, and where you are from. And for the sake of the audio description, the captions, please, whenever you speak again, if you could just start with saying your name, so they get who it is. And I'll hand over to Vicky for the last bit of Zoom meeting housekeeping.
So we've just got some really basic housekeeping that will help the session run more smoothly. So Sarah Compton, Sarah, would you wave? Sarah Compton will be on hand during the meeting if you need any help. If you have any technical or access issues, you can put a question in the chat. If you have a question during the first half of the meeting around any of those kind of issues, just stick them in the chat. Sarah will pick them up and respond to you. When we get to the end of each presentation, if you want to make a comment immediately after the presentation, please either raise your hand in front of the camera or use the Zoom hand raise function, and we will come to you just to invite you into the conversation to unmute and ask your question. If your comment is unrelated to what's going on, if something sparks a thought that's not kind of directly related to what's being discussed, but you want to bring it into the dialogue later, please make a note for yourself. And after the halftime break, we'll ask people for questions. And you can either add those questions to the comment box or put your name down if you want to ask the question in person, and we'll make sure that we come to you in the conversation. You can also just raise your hands physically or virtually if that's easier. When your hand has been raised, we'll come to you, we'll ask you to unmute to join the discussion. If you can remember to introduce yourself, just to say your name each time you start to speak. If we have a number of raised hands, we will go around the room one by one and do our best to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to be heard and is kind of picked up in order. And if this conversation sparks for you any future topics or ideas or themes that you want to pick up in another conversation, please do drop us a line or write them in the chat. We'll collate them in the session, or you can email Sarah at Upswing with any thoughts about a follow-up conversation that you might want to have. We completely understand that kind of lots of people still have caring responsibilities or feel more comfortable with their home situations if they turn off the camera. So please feel free to kind of do whatever makes you feel comfortable to stay in the session and listen in. If you need to have your camera off, you're very welcome to do that. And please feel free to step in and out at any time if you need to. So I think that is all of our housekeeping. Lena, shall I hand over back to you and maybe we can get started?
Yes, thank you very much. Great. Yeah, without anything further, I will introduce the first speaker, Farrell Cox, who has previously shared many tools that I have used in the rehearsal room and find really useful. So yeah, looking forward to hear quite a few different strategies that you developed on different projects and to hear your experiences.
Hello everybody, I'm Farrell Cox. My pronouns are she, her, they. I'm a Black British dark-skinned female and I have short black afro hair and I'm wearing a lime green jumper. I'll be discussing developing my own autobiographical work, and I'll touch upon working with Hot Brown Honey and how I've used these skills on other projects as well. So during my autobiographical project, well-being was at the center of it, and I started this by how I wrote my contracts. I made sure that they were clear, short, and really flexible. And I also discussed with my creatives flexible working and basically how to get the best out of everybody. On other projects, because contracts are quite intimidating and overwhelming for myself, I just go ahead and say, can you please highlight the bits where the information you need from me, which has always gone down quite well. And I also use text to speech on my computer, just so I have another way of processing the words. Also within my personal project, I would give out induction forms, which we all sort of have been receiving at the moment. I think Mimba and Unlimited and Upswing have sent these around quite a lot of the time. So I did that as well, and I included links which were very beneficial and helpful towards my project. Also within my access budget, I included counselling. Just so for myself, if I needed counselling, or for the rest of my creative team, quite a lot of the time, access is one of those things which is quite scary or intimidating, but counselling is there, especially if you're neurodiverse. I would say though, NHS wise, it's great, but if you're discharged from their service within 12 weeks, you cannot do another self-referral. So I suggest going elsewhere. Also within my project, I was very lucky to have a drama therapist, where we did a pre-planning meeting, and I discussed what my dream rehearsal room would be like, what my goals would be like. And I think that's really important for any job you do, for figuring out what are your goals. Is it to create a 60-minute piece? Is it to upskill? Is it to work in a certain theatre? Is it to get money? You know? So it's really just saying, what are those goals? Also within my project, I really wanted to create a certain culture and vibe. That vibe was just free speaking and be able to speak openly. So we discussed audience care quite a lot and how that affected the audience, and vice versa, how that would then affect the creative team. Then another thing that I made sure was the structure of the day was the same. So every morning, whilst we would have our breakfast and our coffees, we would discuss what happened the day before, what would then happen within the day, and then every time we changed from scene to scene, we would discuss what our aims are for that scene. So it was all clear for everybody to know, this is what we want to accomplish and this is what we want to do. And for myself, before I went into the rehearsal room, this is a thing that I adopted from Hot Brown Honey, was to have a little check-in with myself, my head, heart and body. So from a scale of 1 to 10, I would say, my head's feeling like this, my body's feeling like this, and my heart is feeling like this. I made a huge emphasis on staying safe and grounded and really taking accountability on that. So that was written into the contracts as well. So people really need to take accountability on how they're feeling and to say, I'm not feeling comfortable, I'm feeling really confused, I'm feeling safe, and also to allow it not being using different ways of communicating. So it doesn't just have to be text. It can be, for example, I'm feeling very or my stomach is feeling knotty, or I'm feeling I don't know what this is, but it feels like this. So having those sounds and stuff like that and creating a different type of communication. I also had like blankets and stuff in the space, and to allow just to feel cozy and connect to your different senses is a really important thing. So being neurodiverse, you can go from hyperarousal. So hyperarousal is when your brain feels really fizzy and your thoughts are going really, really fast, a little bit what I'm doing now. And then you can go hypoarousal, where you feel really sluggish and tired and you can almost zone out. And there's a bit where we want to be, where we want to feel really present and in the moment, the sort of sweet spot. So the tools for that is like maybe having food in the rehearsal room so you can chew, drinking water. I was very lucky to work with people who I trusted quite a lot, who were able to tag team with me. So if I was feeling really sluggish and burnt out, so my sound designer would jump in the space and be like, you're doing it like this, you're doing it like this. Just so there was a slight separation. So I was still present in the space, but not removing myself, but I could still continue the work in progress. And then towards the end of the day, we did de-rolling. De-rolling is for everybody. Those people just think it's for performers, but it's not. It's basically just stopping work. And at the end of the day, I made sure that I had 45 minutes for people just to cool down, walk around the space and just really pack away. And I removed language like, what are your anxieties and worries? Because I didn't want to plant a seed. So I used words like, what are your thoughts and feelings and what can we do tomorrow? Also, not talking shop unless it's urgent after rehearsals. And another thing for me is making sure that you shower twice a day, getting ready for the day and ending the day, and also not jumping straight into pajamas. It's very easy to do that, especially like when you go on tour and stuff. Check out the new city. My friends joke around when I'm touring and they're like, Farrell, you're just touring for food. Just try out new restaurants, do something else to really decompress. Another thing that I did was I wrote a letter to my character. I wrote a letter to my character to see the differences, what I am compared to my character, and I had those on 2 pieces of paper so I could look at it and be like, okay, this is what my character feels, this is what my character's like, and this is what I'm like. Another thing that helped me was I put on some hoop earrings. Just something to really disconnect, because I know after rehearsals you're in the super buzzy mode and you're like, I really just want to keep talking. So I put on my hoop earrings and I knew physically I cannot get on an aerial hoop with hoop earrings on. So that was another thing that I did to de-roll. And also support networks. The drama therapist was great, was on call for myself and for everybody else. But also a rehearsal buddy to have a little bitch to. We all do it. I'm not gonna pretend. We all have a little bitch during rehearsals. I think that's perfectly fine. Or if you don't have that rehearsal buddy, I think it's really good to have 2 people outside the rehearsal room, one to give you advice and one person to vent to, if you don't have a counsellor. I think looking back on my project, and other projects that I've been on, which I've really enjoyed and which has really helped me, is doing stuff outside with the cast and crew. If it's going to a restaurant, if it's going to a spa, stuff like that. And I think that is really important. So what I did was I made sure that I saved some money and I bought everybody a meal on show day. And I think it's just taking it back down to human connection and really supporting one another in a space and just being understanding. And it's not a one size fits all. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farrell. That was so much. Like, I was like, really, no, like really clear, really, really useful tips and tools to take away. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. Any direct questions or reflections on any of this, or questions about any of those tools and tips? Yeah. Sylvia.
Hi, I'm Sylvia, Joint Artistic Director of Mimbre. I'm a white European woman wearing my hair up in a bun, as usual. I'm sitting in my living room. Thanks, Farrell. That was really good and really clear, and lots of lovely, useful tips. I was curious about whether, how long is your rehearsal day? Or in that specific project that you were talking about, have you got a very specific amount of hours that you aim to do every day, or does that change depending on how the cast and the team, the creative team feels? Or because I'm like impressed that you find 45 minutes to do a role. It's amazing. We quite like, sometimes I find it hard even to find time to stretch out, which I know is terrible. I find that the hardest bit to actually, and I really appreciate how important it is, rather than just rushing home or to your normal to your other life, let's say, or whatever one has to do. I was just curious a little bit more about timings of your rehearsals and stuff like that. Thanks.
So for that project, my rehearsal was 9 to 5, which I wish it was later. We started at 10, but due to people working in different time zones, we had to start at 9 o'clock in the morning. I guess the way we worked on a really strict time limit. It was almost like, we're blocking this out for an hour and we're blocking this out for an hour. Yes, there was still some flexibility. And I think also doing the tag team stuff where people could just jump in and jump out, that really helped, especially with the 45 minutes de-rolling at the end. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Yes.
Lizzie, did you have a hand up?
Hi, it's Lizzie from Mimbre. I'm a white British woman with hair that is rapidly drying from the shower that I just had, and black glasses. Thanks so much, Farrell. What I wanted to ask you about was contracts, which is the part of the process that I have most control over, probably. So at Mimbre, we try to use the ITC equity contract. And the thing that is really clear about that is it's incredibly long. And I just wondered, but I know that we ought to be using it because it's got all the detail in that you would actually need if something went wrong. I wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
I think it's really difficult. So whenever I look at a contract, I find it overwhelming. But that is just a personal thing. I think as long as things are bullet pointed and really, really clear, and maybe a slightly bigger font, and I think it just goes to highlighting things. I think I'm not going to say to people, don't read your contract. 100% read your contract. Don't get screwed over. But I think it's getting that support in hand. So for me, like I said, it was the text to speech is really helpful for me, but for somebody else, it might be just somebody else reading it for them. I wrote my contract like it was a letter, which I'm more than happy to send you. It's just the language for me personally that I find intimidating and stressful. So, and all the information was there, but I know with time and with people, you need to just say, here's your contract kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Even just would make the font bigger.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Vicky, and then Layla, and then I think we move to the next speaker. So Vicky.
Yeah, thanks for that, Farrell. That was really, really useful. Just showing what we do with our contract. So we have the ITC contract as well, but we'll normally do a deal memo on top, which is just the top line info of what's core in the contract, the things that people want to know immediately. And what we've started doing now is to have a meeting with people that we're working with so that they can talk through the contract, because there isn't another way to do it if people find that language challenging.
Yeah, and sorry, yeah, that's what I did. I had a Zoom meeting with all of my creatives, and I we just spoke through it and we said, okay, would you like to adapt it or anything like that, which was really helpful.
And Layla.
Hello, I'm Layla. I'm a woman with light brown skin. I've got long hair, curly long hair, and I'm in my kitchen chopping vegetables. Thanks, Farrell. It was so helpful to hear your process for your show. It was really great. And I just wanted to ask a bit more about the tag teaming, which sounds brilliant, and how you managed to set that up. That sounds to me like something I would like to start doing from tomorrow.
Again, I think I was really, really lucky with the people who I decided to work with. And when I interviewed people, everybody sort of said they're very tactile and wanted to be in the space, and whilst working rather than just sitting back. And I really made sure when I spoke to everybody and got them in the same room and included in the contract that it was a collaborative experience, that people were able just to jump in and shout out and say things. And I was very open in saying, I'm feeling really tired, I'm feeling really sleepy, I'm really confused. And again, with the sounds of I'm feeling, we were able to tag team and get people to get in the space. I think it's really hard to describe, because it was, I guess, just saying to people that this is just going to be a really collaborative experience and people can just share as much as they want within the project. I was able for people to just step in and just to take the load, I guess. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like you set it up in a very open way. And then, but did you find that it helped you be able to take a step back when you needed to? That was
yeah, it helped me reserve my energy. So instead of being like, okay, I'm going through a moment right now, and instead of just leaving the room and just maybe, I guess, jarring or stopping that process, it was a point for me to be like, I can see somebody else doing it, the work can still continue, the work can continue going, but there's this other approach to it and somebody else is doing it. And also you can problem solve things which maybe you're stuck at, you know?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure further reflections will come back in the second part of the session on some of this. I want to hand over to Søren and Daniela from Scarabeus Theatre, who have many years of experience of producing and rehearsing and creation. And one of the things that brought this discussion here was when Søren was telling me about the project you were doing with young people, which was very centered around mental health and issues for young people. And it sounded like it was quite you learned some of the learnings you learned the hard way in the process. And I haven't asked you to just share about that, but that was one of the really interesting. Sometimes we just have to learn on the go, and but very interested to hear some of those experiences as well as your other tips.
I'm Daniela. I'm the artistic director of Scarabeus, and I'm a white European woman with red hair, and I'm wearing a blue jumper, and we've got a white background with some red long stilt skirts hanging behind us.
And I'm Søren, and I'm the co-founder and co-director of Scarabeus. I'm a white, middle-aged man with blonde hair, and I'm wearing glasses and a blue shirt.
And we have subdivided our presentation in 3 parts. We do a context, then I'm talking about the challenges, and Søren, lucky one, is going to talk about the learning. As Lena said, you know, we have a 30 years experience. And I must say, this particular one was one of the most extreme and a steep learning curve. Is not what usually happens in Scarabeus R&D or rehearsal room, but because it was such a steep learning curve, it's worth to talk about it. So we were aiming to create Fall to Fly, which it was a performance. So the aim was to create an aerial immersive performance using aerial and physical theater, and it wove together testimonials from young women that had experience of self-harm and depression. We wanted to find a language that explored the stigma that is around mental health issues and how often they are associated for who experience it as a not being seen and not being heard. And then we wanted also to change the discourse around mental health, particularly for young women, and encourage a more empathetic and knowledgeable perspective. That was the aim that we had. So as you can see, we were dealing already with a double layer of exploring and talking about mental health issue and maintaining mental health in the room. So those are the challenges. We brought together a team of 3 professional aerialists, 2 young people, one myself as artistic director, Søren as a technical director, a writer with whom we have worked before, and a filmmaker, which also was a collaborator of Scarabeus. Both the filmmaker and the writer are mothers and had direct experience of mental health issues with their daughters. The 2 young people, one, they both belong to our Take Flight group, which is an aerial group that is all year around. Both they were a London Youth Circus as aerialist, and one of them had experience of quite severe anorexia, self-harm, and depression. This particular young person, we supported a lot, and I supported a lot on a one-to-one through aerial and other things. So we had done a week of R&D the year before with the 3 same performers, the 2 young people, and a different filmmaker, and everything went fine. There were no problems at all. So a year later, we get our R&D grant, and we've got 2 weeks R&D, one at the point, which, as you know, is pretty intense if you go at the point because it's a residential R&D, so you are with each other all the time, and then the second week at National Center for Circus Arts, culminating in a sharing. So I created a plan, as I always do, and is a plan that usually feels containing. People know what we are aiming over the 2 weeks, but is also flexible and can be changed and updated during the course of the R&D, that in that case was a research and development still, or if it's a rehearsal. Clearly, we what is really important, we don't usually work with a writer, very rarely. And in this case, we had allocated to have the writer 2 days in the rehearsal, in the R&D on the first week, 3 days on the other week. But she asked to be there all the time. And we agreed it was not a good decision. And then the filmmaker came on the second week. The theme was clearly difficult. We were trying to use our usual methodology of work, which Søren will go through exactly what we do during the day, but we clearly warm up very well. We work from devising and improvisation. I come from Lecoq training. We clearly use skills, and we only comment at the end of the improvisations. We never comment during. And we have check-in at the beginning and check-out at the end of the day. And we allocate ample time, an hour at the beginning for warm-up. And like Farrell said, an hour at the end for cool down, what we call check-out and all of that. So what happened is that when we were working through the improvisation and when I gave comment, the writer also intervened, giving comments, but often those comments were not in agreement with what I had just said. And that clearly created confusion in the performers that weren't really sure how to take it further. Because we had the writer in the room, and because it was the first time we really had the writer in the room, I agreed that on the first 3 days, we would have sat around the table for an hour or so in the morning, and the writer had prepared writing tasks. Clearly, that became very soon the floor with big sheets of paper because the performers really weren't actors that wanted to sit around the table. But what also happened is that instead of keeping it to an hour, it started to generate longer discussion, which started to eat into our physical time of devising and doing skills, which were all the 5 performers there were trained and wanted to do. And it also started to break the creative flow because it happened in the morning after the warm-up or before the warm-up. So it was very clear that people started to feel that time was wasted. The young person, the more vulnerable one that I mentioned before, seemed happy to be there and wanted to be there, but at a certain point decided that couldn't continue, so left. The performers the professional performers felt that was quite difficult whilst she was there sometime to explore themes when you have what I would call a survivor in the room or someone that still had experience that they were very, very recent. So they felt that they may trigger something, so they didn't feel really free to explore. They actually felt more free when she left in that sense. The other young people was doing very well. We had talked with the writer that there were some triggering things that she had talked to me, some images and things. And I said, I absolutely don't want you to talk about this in the rehearsal space. She did. And it had quite an effect with literally people walking out of the space. And then in the second week, the filmmaker and the writer fell out big time because they were both claiming that the text that will go into short film that was part of our R&D, they need to have the ultimate, the last word about it, who was going. So they were, and then, so basically, instead of doing my job as an artistic director, I just felt, and exploring all of this artistically, I felt that I was managing an incredibly disbalanced space. And I'm not talking disbalanced in the way we all like it. I'm talking really disbalanced. I felt that the boundaries were not safe. the agreement were not kept. And I was really urged to make artistic decisions that I was not ready to make at that point, because I was just exhausted, full of anxiety, and unable to have a very clear head at that point.
Okay, right. So I'm Søren again, and I'm going to try and briefly run through the learning. And in a sense, I feel that Farrell has actually read out our whole list of learnings, because everything she mentioned is probably on this list. But the number one, obviously, is be discerning and careful with the team you put together, who you have in the room. Obviously, in this case, we had worked both with the writer and the filmmaker before and knew them very well. But what we discovered was they couldn't absolutely not work together, which is quite often something you might not be able to know beforehand. You could, of course, have meetings beforehand that might establish these facts. Number two is set very clear boundaries before you start the rehearsal room. Maybe sit down, write a long list of rules, ground rules and boundaries, and put it up on the wall so you can always have it there, visible in the room to refer to. And also talk about consent, what people are prepared to talk about or work on. Do as much preparation with the writer as possible beforehand. So when you go into the space, you know exactly what the writer is bringing into the space. And then it's much more straightforward when the writer comes into the space, what you're actually working on. Share as much material as you can beforehand about what you're going to be working on. In this case, it was a very, very difficult and challenging subject, but it could be a more straightforward subject. But still, it's good that everybody is informed about what is happening in the room. Share images, books, films, anything that can be shared. And if performers are sharing text sharing their stories as part of the rehearsal process, make sure you have that consent, and make sure you have consent from them as to how that material will be used, both in the space, but also maybe in a finished product that comes out afterwards, that they are comfortable all the time with how it is used and how it is presented in the end. And obviously, if there are themes they're not happy to explore or have made publicly, then either don't do it or maybe wait to a later stage in the rehearsal space. Maybe sometimes it's necessary to break out into breakout rooms and work individually with people. If people are sharing very difficult stories, it might be better for two people, that performer and another person, just to go in a room and work on that for a while, and then decide where you go from there, and see if you're able to take that back into the rehearsal room and use in the process. We had a previous performance called Depths of My Mind, which was talking about the teenage brain, and we wanted it to be a celebration, both a celebration of teenagers, because all we ever hear about in the press is very negative. So we want to really celebrate the inventiveness and creativity of teenagers, and we also did a very thorough research with some scientists about the teenage brain, which is what we brought into the rehearsal space to work with. And more importantly, we had two directors, Daniela and another director called Pete Glenville, and they spent a lot of time beforehand preparing. So when they entered the rehearsal space, they were in complete agreement about what was going to happen in that space and what was going to be worked on. Emerging, which is our next project, is about trans issues. I'm not going to go into it in detail here, but because we have that subject, and one of the collaborators in the project is in a transitioning process, we're also trying to gather as many creative and other collaborators who identify as trans or gender diverse, so we have as much experience in the room as possible. And another thing which is also good, I think it's been mentioned as well, is maybe to have questionnaires before the rehearsal process that everybody is given, where they can express what makes a really good rehearsal process for them. Like Farrell was talking about, what does my ideal, my perfect, my dream rehearsal space look like? So everyone can bring to the table what really helps them in the process, and it can be taken into consideration if possible. And the last thing I just want to run through, so our usual rehearsal day looks like this, is we have a checking in the morning when everyone arrives. How is everyone? Is there anything that come up from yesterday? Maybe people just do a bit of writing beforehand. Then we have a very thorough warm-up. It's quite often a yoga warm-up because Daniela is a trained yoga teacher. In the morning, because we work with circus and very physical tasks, we try to do the most demanding work we know we have to do during the day in terms of skills and physicality, because we know that the time before lunch is normally the most conducive for that. We have a good hour lunch break, and then in the afternoon we can work on less physically demanding projects, or maybe things that needs more time to be looked at. And then, as Daniela mentioned, we have at least an hour cool down, and after the cool down we will have a checkout before people leave as to what happened during the day and what could be learned for the following day or the following week. That's all from me. I think we went just a minute over time.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you because that was very clear. Thank you so much for sharing work-based experience and then the learnings from it. It's really useful to hear what you took away and how you move on to create better situations for future projects and to share those. Vicky, did you have your hand up? And if anybody else had questions specifically to this?
That was just a round of applause, not a hand up.
Doing a silent one. Any specific questions around this? Yeah, Joanna.
So.
Oh, that's a round of applause as well. Okay, sorry, I'm like not noticing that. And Lizzie. Okay, anyone wants a hands up for a question? I think we've got some great, clear tips that's been, and it's interesting to see how many overlaps. Gwen, go for it.
Hiya, thanks everyone. It's really helpful. Mine is a question for Søren and Daniela, but other people might be able to jump in on this. And it's about how much mental health support you can put in your funding application under access, or whether does it come under like the main body of what you're asking for? And does it depend on what you're asking for?
I think it needs to come under access. So I'm not sure what is the maximum, but I think it's a fair amount. So as Farrell was saying, you are actually not relying on the NHS, but you rely on a counselor or a drama therapist or whoever is the right person for that project that one can rely that will be there. We could also put it in the main body of the application, but access allows you to do that. And access only allows you to do it for yourselves and the team of the performers. As you know, it doesn't allow you other access that has to go in the body of the application, like captioning or, so it's good to put it in that budget.
Thank you. Just a follow up for that really quickly, is it your experience that the Arts Council are getting used to having access around mental health requests? Does anybody know?
Molly?
I can maybe slightly answer. So I'm Molly Nicholson. I'm white British woman. I've got long brown hair. I use the pronoun she, her. I'm working from home today. I've got wood paneling behind me. I'm not sure if I can massively answer, but I can just from our experience, we regularly include care access support in our Arts Council applications. We've done it for maybe the last 3 big shows. And just anecdotally, it's never come back with any questions around. I'm not sure if that huge answer, but it's been 5 years. And we go into different offices. So a small yes, but I guess it would be great to hear from the Arts Council. if it was a big yes, if they'd got more used to it.
Thank you, Molly. Apologise for not describing myself. I am a white European woman with dark hair, sitting in her living room. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Gwen. And yeah, if anybody else knows about if there's a maximum amount, please come back to that. But just to be clear, that the access, as I understand it, the access normally, if you apply, say you apply for the like max 15K, the access is separate from that. I think now it's like max 30K, but the access is separate from that. So that's where it's good. But yeah, it's for the to protect the creative team, whereas access for audiences needs to go in the general location. Thank you so much. And Molly, I will hand back to you to share your experience, and both your experience and working with Scotty and as well as other creations. But one of the things interesting when you and me were having a conversation at one point was the discussion about what do you leave at the door of the rehearsal room, what do you bring into the rehearsal room, how sometimes we don't want to share everything. We might, want to park, the performers might want to park things by the door rather than sharing it all. So that was an interesting one we might come back to later as well. And then also I believe you've done a survey on mental health in the performing arts. And I don't know if you might be touching on that within your presentation, or if that's something we can talk about later as well. So over to you.
Thank you. Hi. Yeah, so I'll just quickly introduce myself again. Molly Nicholson, she, her pronouns. I'm a white British woman with long brown hair. I get a little bit nervous of public speaking, so I've put some care practices in for myself today, which include coffee and water. And I've got some rewards for myself after this. And also I've said to the team, if I go over my time, they're very allowed to give me a time check. So that's not going to throw me off. I feel very safe within that. So I am one of 2 creative directors at Scotty and Friends, which is a company I started about 6 or 7 years ago with artist Scotty. For anyone that doesn't know us, we're a queer working class theatre company. We create work that empowers. Can you hear me? It just says my internet's unstable. Perfect timing. Yeah, and advocates and supports marginalised communities, specifically those who have been ostracised because of their class, gender, sexuality, BMI or mental health. I'm also a circus producer and have worked in the circus sector. And as Nina said, I've been working recently with Circus Change Up Mission Group, Health and Wellbeing, on developing and distributing a questionnaire reviewing mental health support and neurodivergent access support for those in the circus sector. That is still being evaluated at the moment. I will touch a bit on it, but yeah, and we can definitely talk about that a bit more after as well. But that's still still within its process. So mostly I'm going to talk about my work with Scotty and Friends. So for the last 5 years, we've dedicated time and resources to understanding and implementing tools and strategies to put care practices at the centre of our rehearsal process, as well as all moments of show creation, touring and core company practices as well. We have been working to understand and include care practice as an access need, which needs support and resources attached to, which we can link more back to that conversation around Arts Council again. Just to say, importantly, all of this work has been in collaboration and would be impossible without the labour of a person called Jen Smethurst, who's an independent practices of care consultant and arts worker. This collaboration is also ongoing. So what I'm talking about today is true of now, but we're still evolving this thinking and what care looks like. And I think that will carry on for, I want to say forever. It's just going to carry on forever, isn't it? Because we'll carry on evolving as people. It's what we do. So I'll talk a little bit about what we do in the rehearsal room. This is a general description first, and then I can go into some specific examples. But like I say, it's where we're at today, and it's not the end point.
and it's something that needs everyone to commit time to. I'm not saying that like you can't copy my homework. I'm just saying that it looks differently for everyone, and this is what's worked for us within our shows. So let me give you in general like some of our rituals of care. So we top and tail each day with check-ins and check-outs, which we've touched a little bit on already today. Our check-ins start with a lighter question to get warmed up. Often it's something like, what's your favourite biscuit? I think purely because me and Scotty really like biscuits, but it can do anything that's kind of light and easy to get in. And then it moves into more of a question of, how are you today? Everyone asks each other how they are. And we do a similar thing as Farrell said as well. Actually, we do, how's your body, how's your head, how are you feeling? That's the start of the day. And then when it comes to the end of the day, we do check-outs. They flip around, so it starts with, how are you feeling after today's beam? And then it always ends with care as a more simple, well, it can be a more simple act. We're very aware of care is an acts of care as spectrum and different for every brain and every day. So what your act of care for that night might be talking to a loved one, but it also might be having something nice for tea or watching something really rubbish on telly. And we always end, which I've just kind of clocked from what you were saying, Farrell, we always end with the end, which I think is our small version of de-rolling. You kind of really added clarity on what that is for me. It's really helpful just to be like, okay, the end, we're done, and then you leave the rehearsal room. Everyone in the Scotty and Friends team takes part of all these check-ins and check-outs. It's all at our individual consent. We don't have to if we don't want to, but we found it allows us to have a deeper connection with the wider team and enables us to kind of play mum when it's needed. Which is also, I think, is a small version of tag teaming that you were saying, where when needed, one of us can just come in and get the teas or give the hugs or have the laughs between breaks or whatever that care is in that space on that day. The main thing I do want to talk about that we've added to our rehearsal process, though, is our role of show parent. So we've added a new role to our team when in creation and on tour, which is the show parent. The role was developed for our show Fat Blokes, which we made 5 years ago, and we've had a show parent on our team for all of our shows since then. We moved between calling the role show parent to degender it, but also sometimes calling it show mom, because it kind of comes from a matriarchal way of working. I'm aware that this is an extra team member to add on to already stretched budgets, and we have looked, and we can talk a bit more about sometimes that role has been someone who's also an SM. Sometimes it's been part-time. Like, we've kind of played around on different versions of our shows where it's still responsive to the needs of the show, so that they can be there. So the show mum, their responsibilities are to run check-ins and check-outs. They observe the rehearsals. If they're part-time, or make sure if there's a moment where they might be triggering or vulnerable elements, they're definitely there. And then they take an hour session with each performer or participant. In these hour sessions, they'll run through questions such as, is there anything you want to talk about? How is the work making you feel? What's the shape of your day looking like? And what are we doing to reward ourselves tonight? These hour sessions always include a nice thing, such as like a sandwich or a good coffee. I really like a good coffee, provided by the company. And the important part is that it's a conversation. So the show parent is answering the questions as well, so that whoever's entered that session doesn't feel like they're the centre of attention. We found that these sessions are really helpful. It gives everyone an hour to themselves. And so what happened maybe like once within the rehearsal week, but it can be once a day if it needs to be. So they'll have an hour to themselves to reflect on how the rehearsals are working for the individual, rather than, obviously with the check-ins and check-outs, they are brilliant, but they're about sharing and supporting the collective group. It's also, we found it's really helpful because it is an external role to the Scotty and Friends team. So if there was an issue with our working practices or something we hadn't realised was building anxiety, we can be confidentially criticised in these sessions. So whoever's the performer, the participant who's in them, doesn't feel there's going to be any jeopardy to our working relationship. And together they, with the show parent, can kind of mutually agree on whether it will be fed back to us and how it be fed back to us and how it be dealt with. And then we can start to enact change so that that person feels more comfortable. That isn't from experience, but it's from just an acknowledgement that no one's perfect, that we may have not clocked something. We may be oblivious to an issue and it's fine. But it's a safe way for the performer to disclose this problem. And also, these hour sessions aren't just for the performer participant, they're for the wider team. For instance, I've had one when I've had a few difficult moments in rehearsals, and I've just had an hour session to work out how I want to deal with them. And in that instance, the show parent's taken some communication off of me and dealt with that on my behalf, and it's been great. This role has evolved quite a bit. So when we were working with fat blokes, we were working with participants. None of the people on stage are professional performers. They all had lived experience, including some trauma related to the subject that we were making the show about. And so the care in the space was essential to make sure that they felt safe in exploring the work. And we supported the show parent into developing specific ways to support that team in relation to the potential triggers from that lived experience. That included talking with people, having time talking with professionals outside of the arts sector in relation to the work, as well as time working with other artists and their experiences working in similar, within similar subject matters. But in a way, we find when we're working with participants that the check-in and check-outs and the show parents are quite easy to bring into the room. Kind of in touching on what you were saying, Lena, in the introduction, that with those group of people, there's very little expectation of how you act in a rehearsal room. So it's easy to kind of enact these places of care. When we've actually worked with professional performers, the experience been quite different, and including care practices has been a slower journey. I think because we all find it potentially difficult to ask for care, and we are also asking a group of people to kind of decode quite a lot of how you are supposed to act in a rehearsal room. So the check-ins and the show parent role are saying you don't have to leave your worries at the door. You don't have to come in with a professional headspace if you don't want to, but if you do want to, that is also absolutely fine. That's great. It's about kind of going slow, understanding where people may feel vulnerable and learning what care looks like to them, giving people permission to be vulnerable, and recognizing where care might not be necessarily the solving solution, but at least we can see where your needs are and we can carve out space for that. And in that instance, in that rehearsal period where we were kind of we were working with professional performers, that the change from the beginning of the rehearsals and the end was really marked. People became much more open, but also had mentioned that the actual time, although the time rehearsing was less, because we work a 10 till 4 day, and we will spend about an hour checking in at the beginning. And so that at the beginning was actually quite anxiety building. So like, how are we going to make a show and it's kind of half a day? But actually the quality and speed of getting to the heart of what they wanted to say was much quicker. That I want to just say is just in that instance though. And the point that we do it is, the important part of it is that it's putting people over productivity. So what I think would be interesting to talk about is what happens if that doesn't happen. I think that is a fear that we kind of is the next stage, because we also obviously have pressures to be productive. But for us, it won't work unless obviously the people are first. So yeah, the main thing I just want to close on, what time am I on? Oh, my timer stopped. The main thing
you have 2.5 minutes, Molly.
Oh, lovely. I'll just quickly mention then the questionnaire. So we've done this questionnaire. Like I say, we're still going through the evaluation process, but we found that there was quite an overwhelming response that there was not a lot of mental health access support in the circus sector specifically. So there is I wonder if there's quite a lot of kind of decoding to do around that in terms of how we ask for care when it's not presented externally to us. And that obviously the important part is about people in the space of resources and power, putting those in place, and how we advocate for that and how we support that, done in a caring way, not just doing it in a way that looks like we're doing the right thing. Does that make sense? The main thing for me to close is just that around the show parent role is that it's a very human role. It's about for us then asking someone how they are, but the important part is learning how to put in the correct structures so that those individuals feel safe answering, and that's what needs those resources, and that's kind of what's linking to the questionnaire. I kind of tailed off at the end, but what I'm going to say is the end for me.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Molly. Can people hear me? I'm going unstable, or at least my internet.
I know, was mine okay? I'm coming up unstable.
Yeah, it was hacking a little bit for me, but I could hear everything that you said. I just lost your lovely face sometimes. So I think if it's okay with everyone, if it's okay with you, Molly, I think we'll take a comfort break now for 10 minutes. So if you got questions for Molly, hold on to them, note them down on paper, or what you could do is put them into the chat box now. So if you have any questions directly about Molly's or any of the previous presentations, or if you have any more general questions, reflections, or any situations or tools or strategies that you would like to share from your work and experiences, then yeah, you can either put them in the box and we'll then come back to it and read it out, or just put your name down in the box, or when we come back, put your hand up digitally or physically. Let's meet back here for 12:20. Okay, so we are opening up the floor for, and really welcome anyone else in the room today to share experiences, to share tools and strategies. And it's been, thank you so much from the speakers for being so precise about tools and like, how do we, what's things that works, what's best practice, what is different ways of making a supportive rehearsal and creation environment. So yeah, any sharing of concrete things that can help us all going forward, that is very highly appreciated, as well as questions. And if anybody, maybe starting off, if anybody has any specific questions for Molly, then yeah, please jump in. I'm going to read up one of the comments from Anna in the chat. I love the idea of the who's always present in the room explanation bracket. And when I saw it demonstrated, it was non-verbal unless instigated by the performer / participant. So they knew that exiting the process and going and sitting with the grandmother just meant they could be seen and were in a safe space, but also that they would not be asked things they did not want to answer unless they initiated the conversation. So that's a really nice reflection of it a similar role used to create a safe space. And also sharing a reflection of like, yeah, how do we make people feel like they don't have to wait to be in a perfect mental health state before they can create work, that the importance of creating an environment where people feel like they can be part of that process, and how important these strategies are. Any other questions? Any questions for Molly, for any of the speakers, or any other reflections?
I have a question for Molly. It's Lissy again. I am loving the idea of a show parent. What kind of people do you recruit into that role? Has it always been the same person? Has it been different people? You're muted, just to warn you.
There we go. It has. That's a great question. It has historically been the same person. So Jen, who I mentioned, who we work with, we created that role together, and it has historically been them, and it's very much part of their practice. But we've started working on other people taking into that role, whether that be, so we have done it a couple of times on small gigs where we're not into long rehearsal periods. So we did a couple of gigs and we had a show parent, and they're also like a bit of a showrunner, but just kind of naming it as that role and the participants in that gig actually have worked with show parents before because they've worked with us before, but also saying that this is what they are here to do as well. Kind of it created that, so they were there to be there for care rather than also just being runner and getting what was needed on the piece. Going forward, we are looking at whether we train up more people. We really want to do that together with Jen, and might think about, well, if we have the resources to do it, think about doing it in a way that can be more of a sector-wide, like bring more people in so that we can all kind of be part of that development. Yeah, but yeah, it has historically been the same person, but we have got a kind of a small setup of the tools that we use within that role, and a kind of a light job description, and as long as the person is conscientious and kind of people first, and I think those can be taken forwards without kind of weight of a like training session. Does that make sense? I think they can be taken on as well and by other companies.
Yeah, I was thinking there must be something around how much authority they've got to step in, which maybe it'd be easy for Jen if she's, that's true, because they have a long history of us, and because like I said, it is important that if we need to be criticized, then that's possible, and they feel very easy to do that because they know us and know that that's okay. But I think also if you just put that out front to be like, this can be part of your conversation with everyone that you're speaking to, and you are welcome to tell us anything and feedback to us in any way that you feel appropriate, then that can be taken on within that role as well. But yeah, because there is a level, it is an important external role to the core company to have that space. Yeah.
Daniela.
I can't hear you.
Okay.
Yes, you.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a question to Farrell about the drama therapist. I was very interested about that. I want to ask two very practical questions. What agreement you made with your drama therapist? Because it sounded that was there on tap with you. And I can understand that one can have a consultant, so you create a fee for the project. But how do you make sure that that person is there? So say in the first 2 weeks, you don't need them, but then you suddenly need them maybe 2 or 3 days on a row. What kind of agreement did you make to make that possible for yourself? And if you want to do it also for the team?
Okay, let me process what you've just said. So the agreement was, originally when we first spoke, my drama therapist was going to be in the rehearsal room for the whole 2 weeks. Due to time and actually thinking about it, we were like, no, this isn't going to work. So they were actually contracted for 3 days, and we almost split up with either half days or full days, sometimes via Zoom, sometimes actually in the space. And if necessary, if more days needed to be added, we could then have a discussion about it. It was very open because I didn't know what I was doing. It was very much like, this role may change. So at first it was more for me and supporting me, and then it became more open and was for the whole creative team. And it was that thing of, okay, so we are hiring you to be on call if people need it, because I cannot take the load of that. And yes, they are still part of the creative team, but they are very external, like the parent role, just to have those check-ins and stuff, but not to just I guess it's allowing so you can talk about anything. It isn't just in times of urgency, I guess. I think what we wanted to stay away from was somebody just sitting in the room and then just like, my time's up, okay, let's talk about sad things. It was more just like, okay, they're there, it's fine, you know. I think, what was the second part of the question? Sorry.
Yeah.
Simply, how did you practically agree with that person to be there when she was needed, or he was needed, or they were needed, given the fact that they possibly had other commitments?
Yeah, so I guess it's that that culture I created of over communicating. So if they were not available, they would say, I'm not available on that day. And it was just as simple as that. Mm-hmm. And when I needed some support for audience members on the last day, I was like, I'm really sorry, I need you to support the audience members on the sharing. And they were able to support me with that. So it was just having those conversations, and at the end of the day, if they can't cater to that, they can't, and we'd think about something else.
Thank you.
Vicky?
Yeah, thank you. This might be a question, it might be a comment, I'm not quite sure what it is, but I'm really appreciating hearing from everybody the different processes that they took to kind of create a safer space to work in. I'm also realizing that a lot of what we're talking about takes some additional resource and some additional energy, and that actually the majority of the people that work in our sector are freelance or independent. So I guess I was just really curious to see if anyone who's kind of working in a more independent space is starting to find their own practices that they're using to kind of, I guess, that are maybe easier to implement for freelancers.
Leila. You're muted, Leila.
Sorry. I haven't got an answer to that question, Vicky, but I would say that I think it's about changing the culture, because there is an enormous amount of pressure still I'm working in a lot of educational settings at the moment, and I'm like, whoa, okay, there's even more pressure here. And I don't want to teach that to students, that they should break themselves in order to do well in this industry. So I think that is not an answer to your question. I'm working on it by just trying to be as honest as possible, and with that, not trying not to fear that you're not going to have any money, because you're saying essentially need some. I've just done it this morning, like there should be more support around this project. You can't parent and direct and produce, and we've been used to taking on all of these roles, and I think that's an inevitability to some extent when you're freelancing or you're doing more independent work outside of the ongoing company structure. I don't really know, but what struck me is just all of us responding to this idea of putting people over productivity, and what happens when you do less. Less, or less is more. We're used to that expression, but what does it, and I think Farrell, somebody raised it, there is anxiety around, and Daniela I think also raised it, the anxiety around, but if we spend an hour doing this, we're not going to have enough time to make the work that we need to make. I think perhaps also Sylvia raised that as well, but it's being able to talk about that and how much more productive it makes you when you can allow yourself to step out, when you can hold the space. And I think what's really hard is when you're always going into a new situation and everything's new, i.e. you haven't got the normal collaborators around you that you might have when you're used to working. Like in Shunt, we all knew each other really well. So you'd learn to communicate, however dysfunctionally at that time, but you would learn ways in which you could share or not share according to how people were feeling. So I think when you're entering into something that's always new, how you carry that responsibility of care for yourself, the people you're working with, and the industry development at large is it's this phrase of putting people over productivity, maybe we just need to have that everywhere.
Søren and Daniela.
Vicky, in response or as a thought about what you just said, because I think as companies, we have learned to argue hard with our funders. For freelancers, I think maybe we could be also helpful by maybe requiring a conversation with the Arts Council in which we talk very clearly that care is so important. And already we can only ask for access for the team or for the artist or whoever is working. We already have to put in the budget the care for our audience or access out of our budgets. Well, I think if more of us start to do it regularly, or if we make a more open agreement, then it will be accepted as a good practice. And I think it needs to become good practice to acknowledge that creatives need support to create well.
Lena, do you have your hand up again, or is that's a legacy hand?
I was just checking I'd muted myself, so you didn't hear me slurping.
Sylvia.
A few thoughts that are going around my head, but I'll try. So I think one of the difficulty I think with the productivity question and try to cram in a lot, it's that normally, I mean, we don't have massive amount of rehearsals time. And I don't know what the average rehearsals amount of weeks companies or artists have normally experienced. So I'll be curious to know and compare it to what we do as well. I also was thinking with the whole sort of creating a caring atmosphere that we also in Mimbre really try to do as much as possible. I sort of started noticing, because what we do in rehearsals, we're so physical with each other, we climb on each other, we rely on each other's well-being to trust each other. And when you come into the room and you feel that maybe the atmosphere or somebody's not ready to work at that level, I'm just trying to see whether somebody has got any advice on that, because sometimes I feel like, are we actually pushing the physical safety? Should we actually do this today? And normally we try to be sensitive to that and go, okay, maybe today we shouldn't do that particular move because it's actually quite a risky move. And, maybe somebody's not 100%, that they're not just, I don't mean like in their bodies, but more actually, in their mental state. But sometimes it's really hard to judge and to decide, especially as we, for example, if we rehearse, I'm also one of the people that are involved physically in the process. So I find it really hard to make quick decisions on that. And I think, I don't know if Lena's in the rehearsals room, she might be able to see that better from the outside, but I don't know. I don't know if people have encountered that sort of where somebody's mental state, that they might actually be not, they might not be in a safe state to actually perform what physically we need, especially for the companies that work with quite high physicality. I had another thought, but that I'll do that later, otherwise they'll get muddled up.
Molly.
Hiya. It was just a comment on that, really. We have found that what you're speaking about, Sylvia, and also doing the research from the questionnaire, there was a lot of work that we've been looking into, which is about that the physical effect your emotional and mental health does play on your body. And that sometimes, I think, which we all probably know, and that sometimes when you're suddenly in a physical space, it brings out an emotion that you hadn't realised you're experiencing. We tried to, so this is kind of like just anecdotally from being quite early on in exploring that, but in the circus show we're making, we have been giving space for that as well. And that was why it was important to us to do quite long check-ins at the beginning, which really delved into the emotion, the head and the heart, kind of what Farrell was mentioning as well, because that wasn't those performers' natural instinct. They came in with, this is how my body's feeling today. And we were trying to say, not pushing them, but saying, if you want to open up as well, like, here's some ways that we can talk about how else you're feeling. And what we found at the end of the rehearsal period, where they were saying that by doing that, my body was much more open. I was able to train. I needed some alone time training. Like, it all kind of like ended up into a circular thing, which made the space more productive. Like I say, like, that was very anecdotal of that rehearsal space, and really trying to radicalize people over productivity. That might not be the end point, but they are really, really intertwined. I think that's the end. That's the end of my sentence.
I think there's something to recognise in the culture. If you train in circus institutions, that there is a culture of kind of pushing through that exists in all of our training, that once you start working professionally, if you don't find a way to negotiate that and move out of that, I've seen so many people kind of drop out of the industry because they were stuck in that space. So I think, lots of practitioners, I know that Mimbre work in a very careful way. I know that you're saying that it's a challenge, Sylvia, but I've seen your practice and I do think you work in a very, very careful way. And I think I'd like to think that Upswing does similar, but I've often found that runs counter to the culture that we have developed as a creative community.
Yes.
Rebecca.
Just a couple of reflections and questions in the chat. Can I take them before going to you, Rebecca? Because it's been sitting there a little. And then Rebecca jumping in up. So from Nix, it's very brilliant that everyone in this space is thinking about how to ensure that best welfare practices are ensuring that safe spaces are created. I wonder if we are the people who would try to make sure people are well looked after in a working environment. However, some organizations will not be prioritizing this. Are there any resources that the sector can offer to freelancers so that they are aware of someone to consult or talk to if they feel like, if they have any concerns, that the sector or there's someone to support them? This has actually been a conversation that I have been part of, and I think several of these conversations have gone on in separate places. Of can we? There are resources out there. There's resources through Equity, through Theatre UK. There are resources in performing arts that maybe are not as well known as they should be, for sure. And looking at if there's a place where we can put those resources to make sure that people know about them. And something that like is, well, I know people who are trying to do some things about it. Vicky, you've also been very much part of that conversation, and also as the Circus Change Shop, looking at if there's resources that can be shared on sort of central hub. Can you say anything more about it, Vicky, from Equity point of view as well as other?
So Equity should be the first point of contact for everyone. Equity is there and set up to do exactly this kind of work. They have mental health services and free mental health services for performers. I think the mental health services for performers are for Equity members, but they support you with GP referrals if you're not. They also have a legal team and a kind of people that you can speak to directly about any issues around employment, contract, etc. So, you know, they are a resource. And when I was working with Equity on the committee, I think the biggest challenge was realizing that circus practitioners don't really engage with Equity beyond the insurance, and that they are, you know, we pay our fees to Equity, but we're not using the service. So I would encourage anyone who is an Equity member to have a look at the Equity website. There is a lot of information, a lot of resource, and you can pick up the phone anytime and speak to somebody there. They are there to deal with freelancers and talk directly to freelancers. Separately from that, I've been kind of part of an informal group of circus organizations and makers who are just kind of have had this conversation around what is it that people don't know and need access to information about, and are gathering and will be reaching out really, really broadly to the wider circus community, just to gather a set of videos that could live probably on the NCCA website as a resource to people, that just kind of talks about these very, very, I would hope would be basic things that people need to know about when kind of going into employment, and to feel safe going into employment. It's still being worked out, but I'm sure everyone will hear about it soon and be kind of tapped on the shoulder to engage with it.
Thank you. And now some more. So I'm going to read the next comments as well, and then sorry, Rebecca is waiting, and obviously anyone who wants to add any thoughts to this as well. So we put a link in the chat from Jess. Another question. Sorry, so buggy. Sorry, could somebody else read?
Can read that. Søren and Daniela talked about consent around material and what would be included in the final product. Does anyone have any thoughts or experience with somebody wanting to withdraw consent after material might have already been included in a final product?
So if I just leave people to, can I leave, Molly I think has a response to that. Can I put in Rebecca's question as or reflection as well, and then for people to respond to some of these things. Rebecca, if you go.
Hello, my name is Rebecca. I'm a white European woman sitting in my very sunny living room in Sweden. I actually didn't have so much to say, but I wanted to answer Sylvia when she talked about this, to respect the state of every performer, for example, when we're working with technique. And I think it's very important, of course, to, if you are a leader, I think you're the person that has to say that this is not important that we do this trick today. And even for me, I am having a group of 6 female acrobats touring, and I even say we don't need to do this trick in the show today. Like, I think that it's important to go even that far to say that this show will not stand or fall with that pyramid. And I mean, if it is, it's probably not a good show, I would say. But like, so that people will feel that, okay, is it really possible? And from the moment that you feel that it's possible to take it out, it's easier to think about if you're in a state to do it or not. Because if you from the beginning feel a pressure, maybe the pressure will stress you so much that it's hard to do it. Yeah, I was just a little thought about that.
That's a really great reflection, and yeah, definitely. Molly.
Yeah, just to answer the comment around consent in material and when someone withdraws their consent, we have had that. We have had that on a few occasions. We have had it where, so within all of our work, there is opt-outs. If you're if there's personal material within the show, there is a plan B for the show at all points. If you want to opt out of any section, and there's a lot of on-stage care within our shows, so someone will come in and hug you, and that's okay. And I think it's similar to kind of what you're saying, Rebecca, where it's once you know that doesn't have to happen, and the show will always be able to stand up without that, it makes it stronger. But we have also had it, so we have dealt with it in other ways as well. We've got one piece of text in one of our shows that the performer doesn't want to perform anymore, but does want it in the show. So we have now another performer, they put headphones on and they sit at the back, and we explain it and we explain it in again quite a human way. It's not about it being the perfect show for the audience. We're like, we are humans, you are humans. You need to know that they are safe right now, and this is okay, but this is the way that it's safe for them, and someone else performs it on their behalf. We have also experienced consent being taken out, and that meaning that it was strong enough, it was powerful enough in terms of it made us question the whole piece, that we actually didn't tour the show anymore. That was a really, really hard decision, and that was about 7 years ago, and we were a very small company then. And just all I can say anecdotally on it is it's one of the best decisions we've ever made. It seemed really difficult at the time financially, and in terms of it was like quite a good show, and everyone was like, you're going to be really successful for that show, and we're like, we're here, we can, that's a marker of success. And then we kind of took it away from ourselves, and that was, yeah, one of the just kind of strongest and best decisions we've ever made in terms of that. Feels like success, that we took ownership over that piece and we cared for the people within that piece and said, actually, you're right, if you don't want this out there, then we don't do it anymore. So yeah, we've kind of had a few varying options of that. If that's helpful to hear.
Thank you, Molly. And I think just as a reflection of the circus, contemporary circus in the last 100 years, I think there has been quite a strong trend in the last 10 years for a lot of circus, a lot more contemporary circus show dealing with quite strong themes and issues. And I think there's a much longer history of care in how to deal with that within theatre, maybe to some extent in dance. And yeah, that like definitely to like draw on those resources. And I know somebody gave a comment on when I put out questions around this a while ago, saying if something is still a trauma, you shouldn't be putting it in a show. Like you have to get over the trauma before you deal with it in a show. I guess the question for that though is, how do you ever know if it's not a trauma anymore? Like that, I don't think that's, it sounds very good, but I don't know how clear cut it always is. But yeah, I think definitely like from the presentations before, like if there's somebody who's in the midst of it, you know, maybe making a show about it is not something that's the best care for them. I think Søren and Daniela, I just quickly wanted to share, because just a addition to what Farrell was saying about her check-ins, because I've been using them for a while. And Farrell, when you first shared it with me, the ones you were using from Hot Brown Honey, there was the body and the heart and the mind on a scale of 1 to 10. You described it that if anybody, well, you didn't have to say why. So if you come into the rehearsal process and you don't want to say why you feel in a certain way, that is okay. But if any of the numbers were, I don't know what you were using, I'm using 5 or lower in our process. If any number is 5 or lower, instead of asking why, the rest of the creative team asked if there's anything we can do to make today easier. And that I have found really useful, both for myself and for other performers. So if that is a 5 on the body, I really don't think I can do these tricks today because my body doesn't feel stable. No, or my mind is a 4. There's those things going on. I'm going to have to leave my mobile phone on today to take phone calls that's coming in because I'm dealing with urgent stuff. No, I find that a useful approach to go, what can we do to make it better, rather than we want to know everything. So thank you very much for that, Farrell, because I've used it so much. Passing on, my laptop has frozen. So I think Daniela, or if you can see someone else, Vicky, you take over there.
Daniela and Søren.
Well, to Sylvia, what you were asking about, companies that use a very strong physicality, and we are completely intertwined and relate to each other. Same as was said before. We always do on the check-in also ask how people feel physically and the level of bruising and being sore. Because, when you work with acrobatics or aerial work, that's what happens. So, and also ask it on the checkout, because as I say, I make a program, so I know already that if someone is feeling really sore about a specific scene or whatever they are doing that scene, it's pointless to have it again the following day. It's better to do something else that eases out. And if anyone feels unsafe and says it, or we observe it, we stop it, because we just don't want to take any of those risks. About consent, we actually ended up to drop Fall to Fly because we just felt that, again, it was a process that started well, and it was not taking us where we wanted to go, which was to make a very strong piece of advocacy and knowledge. The young person that particularly I supported and was originally in the process questioned really hard, and was questioning also the fact that you don't have that experience and you want to talk about my story, which was a misunderstanding, because actually we weren't talking about her story. But what was questioning is for who you are making the show and what it will do. And I realized that maybe my answers, or our answers as a company, were not strong enough. So we had to say, back off on this one, maybe let that to be made by someone else. Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's always possible to back off from something and saying, yes, I've done all this work. It's not wasted work, because actually our biggest challenges are our biggest learning, usually. But if we feel I can't continue this, and I felt as a director, I can't continue this anymore, I'm letting it go. And it felt such an incredible weight off my shoulders and Scarabeus' shoulders. Also because we were not selling it. You know, people were not booking it. That's all.
Thank you so much for that. And yeah, I think that's to keep remembering as well, is that the care is for the creative team as a whole as well. That includes the not only the performers but also directors and the creative production team, to be able to create a supportive environment for everyone. Thank you so much for all the sharings. I'm aware of time, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a quick wrap up and thank you now, because appreciating people might have to leave, but we'll do a soft closing if that's okay with you, Sarah. So just we'll be here for like 5-10 minutes if people want to reflect on anything more. But thank you so very much to the speakers, to Molly, Søren, Daniela, and Farrell, and for being so open and sharing and so precise by that. Thank you to everyone for attending and for sharing your experiences as well. And yeah, it's just an ongoing conversation. There are some more resources shared in the chat. So next, if you find some of those, and of course for others, and we will keep on trying to share. And if there's things that have been mentioned that in the talking today that you would like to see example of, like the induction forms, or how do you do like a more precise contract, please do email us and we'll check. We can share examples, I'm sure, between us to send out to people. And yes, and thank you very much. Well, from Mimbre, thank you to Upswing for hosting it, and I'm passing over to Vicky, and then I think Sylvia has a reflection to add after as well.
So just to say that Slow Thinking is a series, and as I said at the beginning, it started during lockdown because we realized that there weren't very many spaces where we could come together and just have a gentle conversation. We're really keen to keep the Slow Thinking series going. So if there's anything that has emerged from you from today's conversation that you would love to have a follow-up on, really happy to have a conversation around how that might happen. It's always a piece of work that we deliver in partnership, so we kind of facilitate the space to happen, but we're keen to make sure that the conversation is stuff that people want to talk about within the sector. So do reach out if there is a conversation that you want to pick up on, and we will see if we can help. Sylvia.
Oh, no, it's just if people are staying over, I had a question for Daniela and Søren, because when you talk about that your last few productions, you deal with themes that are quite, that can be quite triggering. And I was wondering whether, are you inspired by personal experiences there, or because sometimes within Mimbre we talk about what kind of theme the next show might have, and then if we feel it's too removed from our personal experience, I might be wrong in saying that, Lena, but I feel sometimes that if we feel too removed from that, then we don't feel that we might be the right people to stage it, because it might be quite hard to understand it and to sort of to deal with it. And I was wondering how you choose your theme, or whether they always have a personal attachment to your own lives.
Sorry, Sylvia, before we jump into that question, just knowing that it's 1 o'clock, this is now your opportunity, if you've got other places that you need to go and other things that you need to do, to hop out and to say goodbye and give us a little wave before you go. But anyone else that wants to stay in and continue the conversation, Bye. Okay, so I'm assuming anyone that wants to continue the conversation is now left in the room. So I think, yeah, Søren and Daniela.
Well, yeah, I think all our productions throughout the times have somehow been started here with everything we do, and also having a child together. For anyone in the room who doesn't know, Daniela and I are married as well, so we're simply as intertwined as you can be in life and crime. And having a child together, that changes your life, and that changed our art, and that changed what we did. So depths of my mind, as I said, was about teenagers, because we had a teenager at home, and we wanted to not just explore it but celebrate it. Fall to Fly was about. So we have a large. We do a lot of performances, and we also do a lot of engagement and participation work, and the two things feed each other, so that thing from our performance work that we bring into our participation work, but also quite often we come across things during our participation work that we think this is really important. And the Fall to Fly was because we came across so many young people in our youth work that really the mental health issues among young people is just skyrocketing, and it's certainly not been helped by the last 2 years.
Yeah, this was before pandemic.
And this was even before the pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, never mind now. But at the same time, we saw the effect that, for instance, circus work, aerial work for us, but circus work has, the healing effect it can have on people, as in case with this young person we worked with, who Daniela taught one-to-one for 6 months. To enable her to apply to become part of the London Youth Circus. But at the same time, as Daniela said, there are also points where you kind of meet a wall and say, well, I can't take this subject any further, also because we're not equipped or skilled enough to deal with it.
With emerging, which is our experience of having a trans son, which came out publicly 3 years ago. So that is an incredibly complex experience to being the mother, and it's really based on my relationship as a mother to Naisa, and because as a mother, it's even more is inside your guts, because that child that you have raised as a daughter and has been inside you at some point says, I'm not. And it made you question, where was I? And I mean, this is not that when came out publicly was, there were clearly a lot of things before. But the reason we decided to do and to be courageous to do it is because there are a number of families that do experience this, and nobody talks about it. What people talk about is either acceptance or rejection. Nobody talks about this process that there is. And when acceptance become really acceptance, and all the concerns that you have as a parent, and how you try to slow down a process, particularly if it's medical transition, but all the concern that your young person has that want to support you also somehow as a parent, but at the same time, they are making decisions that you may don't agree. So we felt it wasn't explored, and definitely it wasn't explored in an artistic way, in a way that is not a TED talk, but is also metaphorical, and is an ongoing process. And that's why we have learned so much about keeping a safe space, because that is our story. It's not someone else's story. It's not just inspired, because Naisa and I, we are also performing it. And I'm also directing it So that's why there is so much work that needs to be done before. Yeah, and all absolute care in there, and accepting that if no, I really don't want to explore this yet, means you're not, and or I'm not. And then when you're ready, we explore it separately. This is actually one of the first time that we have decided to create the equivalent of breakout rooms, where the performer is only with the choreographer or the person that Phil can explore, and then maybe it will be the choreographer or the dramaturg that actually will introduce to the team again what has happened. So there is nothing that becomes a conflict. And we are not going to stage any conflict, by the way, because I think it's completely redundant.
Molly.
Yeah, I just might add to that. Well, I think so. We're kind of thinking about that as well at the moment, Sylvia, in terms of a lot of our work has been based on lived experience from Scotty as the artistic director, and that takes a toll on them. And at the same time as that taking a toll on them, also we are looking towards decentralizing the voice. And we're an independent company, but we got money from Paul Hamlin about 3 years ago. So we've been working in a more of a stable funding situation. So we're also looking at what our future looks like to hand over our platform. And this is a very, very early thought process. But we're looking at kind of what the company would look like if, say, it was if we'd started handing over the work to other people. Be like, you use our platform and you come and make work not under our name in terms of crediting us, but kind of providing space, money, processes and mentoring and support. And then that also removes a burden off Scotty as well. Another way we're looking at it is that we work a lot with participatory work. So we're working with participants. So that always has been fueled by a lived experience of Scotty, but looking at what that looks like for the future and how we do that without the relationship with Scotty. So someone else might come in and be like, let's explore this, and we attach our processes to it. I think it's really interesting because, like Lena was saying, we have all kind of gone. There has been a big journey, hasn't there, to present more real stories on stage, and then now I guess a lot of us are reflecting on the toll that is actually taking on the performers on stage. And so what is the future around that? And yeah, we're going as far as being like, can we work totally collaboratively in this kind of utopia of you take everything, we don't do it anymore, autonomy is 100% with you, but then how do we make that safe for those people? Allowing failure, I guess, and making it safe space and to create still quality performance for those people. I think it's really interesting. We are really, like I say, we're really, really early thoughts of it, but it's something we're definitely exploring as well at the moment. To remove that pressure off that one person, of mining their trauma,
Just wanted to check in on whether anybody in the room had anything to follow up on that. Layla.
Hello, let me just put my video on. I think, on the subject of this developing care practices in the rehearsal space and trauma manifesting in the work, or like how we're dealing with trauma on the work, in the work. Just it's really interesting, like the point, I guess, that we're at, because certainly witnessed it over the years, of recent years, like more and more autobiographical stuff coming up. And gosh, I'm feeling a bit anxious actually when I'm talking about this. And it came up like just earlier in the conversation, how do we, are you ever ready to put, should you be going through out of the trauma before you put the trauma on the stage? I think this is a really interesting discussion, and there can't be a yes or no answer to it, because having a binary answer is like not gonna be helpful in discussing that. I just want to like have that conversation, I guess. I think it's, you go to drama school, I went to drama school, you're never ready to put your trauma in the room when someone's saying, and I always come back to this, like, oh, I can't be fully present in this improvisation because I'm not really ready to share that in a room full of, how are you ever going to do that? And then interesting to hear Farrell's process with a drama therapist, and like my work also as a teacher. I'm a yoga teacher also now, and like I've done quite a lot of trauma work over my time. How is the arts helping people to work through trauma is very interesting. I don't know, I just wanted to bring up the idea of like sharing and broadcasting and making public the things that you need to share can be very, very helpful, as well as very, very demanding on yourself. And I think that, I just think it's actually quite, also would say exciting, interesting, that we're at a point where perhaps we can genuinely support that. Like, I see yoga and I see, I see lots of different tools for dealing with trauma. And why not the arts, actually, in a proper way, rather than a commercial way? Yeah, that's it.
Just wanted to kind of jump in with a couple of thoughts. I think firstly, the idea that trauma is a linear process, I think is utterly flawed. It's something that is cyclical quite often and can be re-triggered and keep happening. So, I think that sense that you get through it and there's a point in which you're kind of completely disassociated from it and you can look back and mine into it and everything's good is a challenging one. I think secondly, there is a sense that in order for a piece of work to be interesting, it has to have trauma at the center, which I question. And I think we need to interrogate for ourselves why we are attracted to a theme before we start kind of making work on it, and think about what we really want to say and what experience we want to give the people that are making it, but also the audience that are seeing it, who might have experienced the space that we're tripping into. And I think there's a lot of care that needs to be taken when approaching work that is dealing with subjects that are difficult and triggering. And people don't always give it the time. Farrell.
I was slightly weird to say, but I think we shouldn't be scared of trauma. I think trauma and joy are kind of like at touching, they're kissing in a way. So for example, my show is all biographical show. Yes, I'm still living through that every single day. I have my mental health things, and I don't think we should just put it aside. And that is still going to be a trauma-informed space. And working with Hot Brown Honey, that was completely about the Black experience. I'm still subject to trauma when I go into the rehearsal room and when the audiences watch it. But I think it's that thing of making work what you're interested in rather than trying to be interesting. And I think that just comes always from the heart of things, be interested rather than being interesting. And I think the beauty of art, well, for myself, and circus, is that I can share my experience in a palatable form for people, because I think circus and performance does that. Yeah, that was just my comment on things.
I think that's really great to hear, Farrell. And I think being interested rather than trying to be interesting is really strong. But I also question, even if you are interested, you know, around the care and the capacity that you have to translate that into something that is, as you say, touching on joy or touching on something that will leave the audience in a space where you understand where you're taking them. I think Søren and Daniela, you had your hand up.
Sorry. Yes, a couple of things. Well, first of all, I want to say that I think, you know, circus, what both of Farrell said, circus has a unique language to bring to a process and bring to the stage. I also think circus as a tool in working with other people in a non-professional setting has a very unique power to make people work through traumas or work through issues, actually without having to confront them necessarily. They confront them on a much deeper level, which can then give them the strength to deal with their issues. And there's also, I mean, the thing I hate the most to go and see is somebody kind of doing their psychotherapy on stage in a show, and basically, you know, kind of thinking by exposing all my problem and issues on stage, that will be interesting enough. And that will have the opposite effect, you know, that the audience will shy away from it. But as I also said, this thing about being interested rather than interesting, if things come from the heart, then, you know, you're already on a good start to everything, both on stage and also off stage, and also when you're teaching other people. And at the same time, there's self-care and looking after yourself. And because what we found, you know, doing lots and lots of engagement work, working with families, really families with really serious issues, you know, we found ourselves completely exhausted and almost burned out from time to time because we're carrying so much. So we've actually built into our budget now. We have built counselling into the budgets because we need it as much as the families we work with.
Thank you so much, everyone, for both the sharing and that discussion, which, like I say, I think is just an ongoing one, and those are beautiful words as well. I think we're interesting, and the heart, keeping the heart in it. I need to close this room. Well, I need to go, so I don't have to close it, but I need to go. I'm afraid, but yeah, thank you so much. At the moment, I can't, so I have to switch to tablet, so I can't see you all. But yeah, really valuable. I'm really glad we managed to have this session. Thank you so much for making time for it, and for sharing where you're at. And yeah, let's keep the conversation going. And like we say, it's an ever evolving, you know, artists, circuses, and to keep on having those conversations. And yeah, talk with people who have gone on their journeys. Talk to people, contact people. I think with most of those things, people are really happy to share. And when you know, find yourself in a situation which you think might be similar to what someone else gone through, you know, pick up that phone or their email or whatever mode of communication, because by sharing our experiences is the way we're going to keep moving forward. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to leave. Sarah will close up the room shortly. And yeah, any thoughts or feedbacks on this, or like Vicky said, any other thoughts on other sessions that could be useful? Obviously, the Zoom is still there, still provides a way for us to meet from different parts of the country and the world. So yeah, do contact Sarah or Upswing about this. Thank you.
Thank you.